We're looking at chapter 11 of our text, and that is managing conflict. So far we've looked at what is conflict. We've also looked at conflict styles. And now we get to the third section, and that is conflict in relational systems. So when conflict happens, it happens in a system, meaning it happens in an interdependent relationship, as we saw early on. And it's determined not only by your choice, but also by what the other person chooses. So it's not just a matter of individual choice. It depends on relational interactions. So there are two types of conflict responses, you might say, in relational systems. The first is complementary, and the other one is symmetrical. In complementary conflict, the partners use different but mutually reinforcing behaviors. Okay, we'll develop that. And some complementary conflicts are destructive, while some are constructive. The other one is symmetrical conflict. In symmetrical conflict, both people use the same tactics, and the same thing with this. It can be either constructive or destructive. So let's go back to complementary. In a complementary fight-flight approach, which is common in many unhappy marriages, one partner addresses the conflict directly, whereas the other withdraws. Now, of course, this pattern can cycle into an increasing hostility and isolation because each partner punctuates the conflict differently, blaming the other one for making the matters worse. So one will say, "I withdraw because you're so critical." And the other one says, "Well, I criticize because you withdraw." Okay, so it really doesn't work, this type. This same fight or flight pattern also shows up in conflicts between parents and teenagers, mostly over issues like chores, cleanliness, curfews, and families who fall into a demand-withdraw pattern are really going to experience stress and be unhappy and dissatisfied in their relationships. Excuse me. Complementary approaches aren't the only ones that can lead to problems. Some distressed relationships suffer from destructive symmetrical communication. So if both partners treat each other with matching hostility, I'm angry at you and I speak in a way that's degrading, you're angry at me and you speak in a way that's degrading, that's symmetrical, right? One threat and insult leads to another, and it turns into an escalatory spiral. It just spirals up into out of control. If both partners withdraw from each other instead of facing their problems, it just goes the other way, right? It's a de-escalatory spiral. The hostility decreases, the open hostility decreases, you might say, but this satisfaction and vitality within the relationship is kind of destroyed. So you look at table 11.2, it shows complementary and symmetrical conflict outcomes. That's well worth looking at it. So in table 11.2, both complementary and symmetrical behaviors can also be constructive. So if the complementary behaviors are positive, then a positive spiral results, and the conflict stands a good chance of being resolved. Constructive symmetry occurs when both people communicate assertively, listening to one another's concerns and working together to resolve it. Now let's look at serial arguments. In a perfect world, we would work through each relational conflict, move on, satisfy that the matter was resolved, and put it to rest. But in real life, these issues tend to reoccur. So serial arguments are repetitive conflicts about the same issue time and again. They focus on topics ranging from the seemingly mundane, household chores, to the extremely serious stuff like finances and substance abuse and infidelity. So one of the most common problematic behaviors in romantic relationships is overspending and sloppiness. And this seems to occur again and again. It becomes a serial argument, as you can tell. Another source of ongoing friction is personality characteristics. such as introversion and extroversion. So if you're an extrovert who craves social interaction with others, your partner is an introvert who craves or cherishes solitude, you can see that you're going to have challenges. And what happens here is that because it's an ongoing, long-term, your personality doesn't change overnight, these become serial arguments for both partners. Another common issue in serial arguments involve communication styles and practices. So if you typically confront your partner and it's routinely assertive, that's likely to cause continual friction. Likewise, chronic disputes will occur if you prefer candor while your partner is more diplomatic. All right, the style, you've got to make sure that your styles match each other to a certain degree. So regardless of the topic, unresolved serial arguments can be emotionally loaded, and serial arguments are more likely than non-recurring ones to use hostile communication because we've gone over this ground and we again and again, and so tempers flare. We've been down this road a dozen times, and sometimes you need a third party to help you sort out this serial argument. Toxic conflict, the four horsemen. Some conflict approaches are so destructive that they are guaranteed to almost wreck any relationship. So Gottman has identified four destructive signs, and he's able now to predict with high accuracy if these signs are present that the newlyweds will end up in divorce. The first one is criticism. These are attacks on a person's character. So instead of using I language, you language is used, and it's evaluative. You never think of anyone but yourself. Criticism direct. Secondly is defensiveness, and that's a reaction that we all have to protect ourselves by denying responsibility. You're crazy, I never do that. And then, of course, very often we counteract, well, you're worse than that about me. Contempt is a contemptuous comment, belittles and demeans. So it takes the form of name-calling put-downs. You're a jerk, or a sarcastic Bob. Oh, that was brilliant. Contempt can also be communicated non-verbally through dramatic eye rolls or disgusting sighs. And then stonewalling. This occurs when one person in a relationship withdraws from the interaction, shuts down the dialogue, and any chance of resolving the problem in a way that's satisfying to both people. So, critical, contemptuous communicators have a high risk and an increased risk, I should say, of cardiovascular problems such as high blood pressure and stiff muscles. So it not only jeopardizes your relationships, it takes a physical toll on you. So toxic conflict can be destructive in any interpersonal relationship. Very often we engage in conflict in the same way, in a ritualistic fashion. Our communication patterns develop into conflict rituals. They're unacknowledged, but they're very real, repeating patterns of interlocking behavior that become problematic. So, rituals can cause problems, though, when they become the only way relational partners can handle their conflicts. So, as a competent interpersonal communicator, you should have a large repertoire of behaviors, and that you're able to choose from the most effective response for that given situation, that relationship, that context.